Ew. This is
Morning, everyone.
Morning.
morning.
Hi.
Morning is a very unusual time for a night czar.
Yeah, I
That's
fully
all I'm
agree.
saying. I think we've got someone's mic is picking up the feed, so
Might be mine. Don't know.
Chris, you look like you've got a very professional setup there. So
Yeah,
maybe you're
trying to look professional. Is it working? Can you hear me?
well.
Yeah.
We can hear you, but you're quite low, and we're getting a lot of howl around. I'm not saying it is you, Chris, but
we might as well start somewhere, right? Well,
do you have speakers playing anywhere?
No, I don't know.
Hmm.
That is weird, isn't it? How is that? Is that better?
I'm still getting echo.
Yeah.
Maybe if we all put ourselves on mute when we're not speaking, and then we'll see how it goes.
Okay. If I mute, the delay is still there. I'm not the culprit, I promise.
That's sounding a little bit better. Can everyone hear okay? Yeah? Okay. Brilliant. So I think Oscar was going to come in and do a little introduction for us before we kick off. Is that right, Sybil? Sybil, I can see you're in the chat. Oh, okay, I can just go ahead. Brilliant. So welcome, everyone. My name is Amy LAMÉ. I am the Night Czar of London and Six Music presenter. And we are here today to discuss welcoming everybody in your community, in grassroots live music venues, dance venues, nightclubs, and all of the places and spaces that we love so much, but that we also miss so much under COVID restrictions. So we have a fantastic panel lined up for you. And if I could just go around and ask everyone to introduce yourselves and to give us a little bit of a background as to what you do. Yeah. So Emily, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Emily Marlow. I'm a freelance events and projects coordinator. I work a few places, so Girl Gang Leeds, as it says on the bottom there, I'm co-founder of. We've been going in Leeds since 2017, but there's also sister communities in Manchester and Sheffield. We put on events that platform women and people of marginalised gender. And then I also work at Music Leeds, where we support local music at any level. We've been doing that a few years now. I've been there since last year. And I also work with Come Play With Me, which is a local label. I'm the diversity projects coordinator there. So that's me in a nutshell.
Fantastic. Great. Thanks, Emily. We'll move on now to Chris.
Hi. Hello. Wow, I sounded awfully croaky there. And now I'm back. Right. My name's Chris Halpin. I'm a singer, songwriter, and disabled artist. Most people would know me for playing the strange and interesting MEIJER gloves, a gestural interface that developed by Imogen Heap, which I worked very closely with Drake Music to kind of repurpose. I'm quite quiet. Let me just try and turn myself up a little bit. Is that any better? And we worked very closely with Drake Music to repurpose Imogen's technology as a kind of accessible technology. And yeah, my kind of kicked off with Independent Venue Week. Funnily enough, it was IVW 2016, which was really the kind of the launch of my career. What was meant to be a sort of week-long tour of the UK and then kind of go back to trying to find something to do became the whole thing. The phone kept ringing and I was traveling and doing more and more gigs. And like I say, what was meant to be like a week turned into sort of 18 months. Been to the US, all over Europe. and learnt a lot about what it means to be touring at that level and be disabled and being a wheelchair user, having mobility issues. And yeah, it's been an adventure. Most of it great, some of it rubbish, I'll be honest.
Well, we'll delve into that a little bit deeper when we get into the conversation. Karen, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is CARIEN. I'm the Chief Executive of an organisation called Drive Music. Chris just mentioned this because we've been working quite closely together for a good few years now. We've been around for a few decades, and we're a team of disabled and non-disabled people working together to achieve change and to improve access to music making activities. And we feel very strongly that absolutely everybody has the right to make music, and that music is a human right. We work with disabled people of all ages, all over the country, and we often use technology very imaginatively and creatively to make music. So many people we work with aren't able to play conventional instruments, and one of the things we do is look at what we can make and create ourselves and with our communities of artists and technologists in terms of making bespoke and accessible instruments. So we work across a range of programs from learning and participation, very much around first access to music making, right through to commissioning artists to make new work, and through to the R&D work, which I've been talking about, which is around commissioning and making and designing accessible new instruments.
Great. Thank you so much, Carien. Now, a legend in his own day. Let's go to Big Jeff.
Hello, I'm Jeff. I'm basically, I'd loosely describe myself as an obsessive compulsive gig goer. I've been lucky to be involved. Like sometimes find myself actually performing on the stage. I've been involved with festivals like Green Man, BrisFest as well. I was on the board of trustees for BrisFest for a while, and yeah, I mean, I'm just someone who's kind of doing music has found this way into like quite a lucky position, I guess.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jeff. And it's brilliant to have everyone with us today. And a special thank you to Sybil and to Oscar and to the whole of the Independent Venues Week team for making this possible. So I'd encourage everyone who is taking part in this to put comments and questions for the panelists in the comment feed. We'll be reading them out. We'll be dealing with them over the next 45 minutes or so. And so what I'll do now is I'll lead us into a discussion about the topic, welcoming everybody in our community to our venues, and then we'll open it up for a wider discussion. So I'd like to kick off with a question regarding representation. So I think it's worth recognizing that on this panel we have diverse representation of experiences, but obviously we don't have anyone of color on this panel. And so I just want to say that, you know, and recognize that and say that, you know, maybe that is some work that we could do better next time, and making sure that all of our voices are represented. But I do think that we have some experiences here that are really worth highlighting and exploring a bit deeper. So Chris, I was wondering if you could kick off by telling us, you alluded to some of the opportunities and maybe challenges that you faced as an artist touring and going into spaces and places. What is it that makes things a positive experience for you and what doesn't?
Well, it's that I'm worried that that's a bit loud, but people are saying
no, it's not. It actually turned it back up. Go on.
Oh, really? Okay, cool. Right. So I think, yeah, obviously there's been lots of positive experiences, but I think my career looks like it's going quite well. I've played some pretty big places. I mean, the name I always drop is I did the Kennedy Center. It was the last night of what started as my IVW tour. So that's kind of a long way from the boiler room. But what people don't see is the amount of stuff that I have to say no to. The main access issue for me is around stage access. Stage access is always kind of a big problem. And and like I say, I turned down a lot of stuff because venues can't accommodate me getting onto the stage safely. And these aren't necessarily, we're not necessarily talking about small venues here. I turned down an event before lockdown. It was a big deal. It was in Europe. It was in partnership with Google. It was not like a kind of a tiny thing. And they just couldn't come up with a safe way for me to get onto the stage. And then there's also what I'm really confused by is a sense of friction. As I've tried to highlight this stuff on social media, there's much more resistance than I expected. I've talked about wanting the music industry to be more inclusive, more open in terms of access, and I've been quote unquote shot down with comments like, "Just use TikTok, dude." Like, I mean, we're talking pre-lockdown before we were all forced into doing things on Zoom and stuff, but it was kind of seen as a sort of a non-issue in this day and age. But live music is not only it's the reason I do what I do. I mean, in a practical sense, it's also how I pay my bills and feed my kids. Live music is my job, but it's what I came here to do, and that connection with the audiences is absolutely vital. And so for me, the being out and playing is the whole reason that I'm doing what I'm doing. But there are obviously positive experiences, and I think it's fair to say that there's a level of success where access gets a lot easier suddenly, and there is a big difference between doing small local venues and playing bigger places, especially internationally. Of course, if people are spending a lot of money to get you somewhere, then they're not going to mess up on, sorry, the stage is like, we can't get you there. So there's definitely a sort of level of what concerns me, that route. I'm not convinced that for all the noise that I've tried to make over the last 4 years, that the pathway for the next sort of person who is ambitious as an artist and faces access barriers, physical barriers that I'm talking about, is that pathway any clearer? Is it any easier? I'm not convinced that it is.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm wondering, CARIEN, whether you have thoughts on that, because obviously you work with so many people with varying disabilities. What has your experience been like, and the experience of the artists that you work with? You might want to unmute yourself. Thank you. And Chris, thanks. Mute yourself.
Yeah. There's obviously, I recognise a lot of what Chris has just been talking about, and I think, one of the things, and I'm now talking from an organisation kind of perspective, is one of the things we always say is that in order to really affect and achieve real change, is you need to invite disabled people to the table. Without that, there isn't going to be sufficient change. And actually, without people who have actual lived experience, so that's really, really critical. And there's a lot of work to do still around kind of structural change in our society. And one of the things we're really concerned is sort of looking at where are those barriers. So are they, and how can we either as an organisation or an individual or as a society remove those? And and that is, it's not impossible, but you need to see it as a collective responsibility. So we're all working together to do that. So I think, for me, it's very important about disabled people having a leading role in these conversations, and also to discuss the changes. In terms of kind of greater representation, I think, again, give over your venues, your platforms to disabled promoters, producers, and so on, when you want to again see change. Now, there is another thing which Chris just talked about, which is that some venues aren't particularly accessible. So if that venue isn't accessible, they need to be really explicit about that. What does that mean? Or are they accessible up to a point? What changes are they committed to making? How can you make people who may not feel welcome or may feel daunted by your space, how can you change that? I know these are lots of questions, but I think it's what I've learned, I think, within Drake Music is that you need to listen and learn and then commit to action and change. And with that comes investment. And with that comes collaboration and really pulling together and influencing people in the sector that we all operate in.
What do you make of organizations like Attitude is Everything? I know that they've done an enormous amount of work to try and break down barriers and make places more accessible.
Yes, they're extraordinary. I love Attitude is Everything, and they're one of our kind of partner organisations. I think they're a really, really important organisation. Also, what they offer, which I was going to mention later on, but I think again, it's really practical kind of guidance and tools around kind of, you know, their DIY guide to access, for example.
Yeah, I love that. It's free to download. It's like the easiest things that you could do about improving accessibility in your venue. It's like everybody can do it.
Exactly. And it's and offering those things and also breaking it down into practical steps and being very creative and imaginative about that. I think that's important. So you don't only give the kind of, you know, highlight the issues and the barriers, but you also start breaking down and showing what can be done differently in a way that we can all do. And I think another thing around access and representation is, of course, that, you know, that there is a very, very, and I'm talking now particularly about the communities that Drake Music works with, but people have a very diverse range of access requirements. So somebody else might actually want to come into a venue early and kind of understand what the feel of the place is like, and you know, and another person may need a ramp, or, you know, somebody else needs information in a particular format, or you may want to caption your, you know, your so and there is a lot that we can do. I think the other thing is that, you know, you need to read it. It's not impossible. It can be done.
Yeah. I think that's such an important message, that it is actually, you know, relatively easy to make your venue, your space welcoming to more people in the community. In my role as Night CZAR, I work closely with grassroots live music venues, but also LGBTQ plus venues. And I think one of the best moments in my work was when we had a training session run by Attitude is Everything for LGBTQ plus venue operators. And, you know, it's usually quite costly to do this kind of training. The will was there, but I guess maybe the resources weren't. So we enabled that to happen. And, you know, it was amazing to see people all of a sudden just say, oh, I thought that, you know, I wasn't accessible at all, but actually they realize that if you put clear information on your website about particular things, that access doesn't necessarily mean what people sometimes think it means. You know, we often kind of think, okay, well, it's, you know, we have to be completely accessible for wheelchair users, for example, when some wheelchair users may be able to negotiate a step or two, you know, and so it is, like you say, really breaking it down. I'm wondering, Emily, whether you can come in now and talk about this. You know, if we think about the protected characteristics of age, disability, gender reassignment, race, religion or belief, sex, sexual orientation, how do these interface with each other in your experience in terms of making places welcoming?
Yeah, I think they're completely inseparable. Like, you have to consider everything together. Whether you're working, for example, with Girl Gang Leeds, we specifically work with women and people of marginalised gender, but we always try and consider all the other protected characteristics. So, disability, for example, you mentioned the DIY guide from Attitude is Everything. We've used that for years, and I always recommend it to people. It's a great resource. Yeah, I think it's vital that especially if you're working if you're working to platform or to make experiences better for people from one group, you should consider the intersectionalities, definitely.
Big Jeff, I'm wondering if you have some experiences you'd like to share from your own personal viewpoint.
Yeah, I mean, like for me, like especially within Bristol, it actually really helped me actually having live music venues, because it actually helped me access some parts of the cities which I thought would be too intimidating to kind of go down. And also within that, having, you know, like kind of like a structure, so you know what time, quite often you see what time like bands, if they're doing like a kind of like a gig or a festival event, quite often you'd see like the set times. And so you quite often you turn up to a gig at, say, like the Louisiana or the Exchange. The doors would usually be 7:30, and so usually I get down there for like door time. But then usually you'd know that there's like a set structure, and actually that's one of the things which has really kind of helped me, because sometimes I found that with going to gigs, it's helped me, you know, like understanding like either emotional barriers or sometimes mental health barriers, because of it's like kind of getting me out the flat. And I knew that most of the places would be completely safe once I got inside. Sort of
Yeah,
thing.
that's really interesting. So clear, well signposted information
Yeah.
with definite times, so that you feel comfortable and in
Yeah.
control. And I mean, is there one that that you think is particularly doing well when it comes to this?
I think, I mean, obviously I mentioned like the Exchange, because they've been like really embracing like the local community around them. And it's also helped the fact that they have, you know, like really probably embraced like a communal hub, and the fact that, I mean, like they are the first venue in Bristol to be community owned.
Yeah.
And so they run like kind of workshops for like LGBTQ people. They've set up things like Eat Up for Starters. They have a record shop upstairs, run by Specialist Subjects, who specialise in putting out kind of more like emo pop punk kind of stuff, but they quite often deal with people from, you know, trans or non-binary backgrounds. Also, you've got, I mean, like it's places like the Trinity, which is like a kind of old abandoned church turned into an arts venue, which is probably, in terms of like the access wise, probably the most accessible venue in Bristol.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, I've got places which I really love, like the Louisiana. I mean, that's partly because of one of my first gigs I kind of went to in Bristol was there, and yeah, I found that I've been like kind of adopted into their family, sort of thing. So they almost like kind of treat me with open arms, but it's through those going to those places which have really opened me up.
Yeah, that's incredible. I mean, we've heard some great examples of some good practice. Attitude is everything, and the venues that Big Jeff has mentioned. You know, Chris has spoken about places that have done quite well, and not so well. And CARIEN told us about her experience. I'm wondering then what you know about representation of people, yeah, and how you feel about you know, being seen on stage or as crew or venue staff or audiences in grassroots live music venues. So is it, you know, is it because things are hidden? I mean, sometimes you can go to a gig and you can think, I'm just here, you know, I'm just here with all, you know, one type of person. They're all just white heterosexual men. Not that I don't like them, but, you know, a little bit of diversity is probably quite healthy for a, you know, for an ecosystem. And I'm wondering what your experiences have been like. Emily, do you want to come in here?
Yeah, sure. You probably saw me chuckling along then when you were saying that. Yeah, I think yeah, personally, growing up and going to gigs, there was a lot of experiences like that. But I think the ones that I've found most enjoyable have been where I've seen people like me on the stage or working behind stage. It's always so much more enjoyable to see people like yourselves being like, oh, look, that's my experience reflected back at me. I think it's so important for everyone to have that, to be able to feel that connection with artists, but then also see people like themselves doing these other jobs, like crew members and working as techs and things. I think it's
Was there someone in particular that you thought, oh, I want to do what she's doing?
Well, on the artist side, I saw Dum Dum Girls at Brudenell Social Club a few years, well, probably 7 or 8 years ago now, and just seeing a full all-female band was mind-blowing. It wasn't something that I'd seen at all growing up, going to gigs. So when I saw them, I thought, oh, it's amazing. I want to put on gigs like this.
Yeah, that's it's so important. You know, the saying, you can't if you can't see it, you can't be it. Chris, have you found that from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, it's you can still hear me, right? Yeah, it's massive for me. I was pretty reluctant. I mean, I didn't come here to be, you know, the disabled with a capital D artist, but when I remember on the IVW tour, the last night at the Half Moon in Putney, one of the security guys came into the dressing room a little bit sheepish, but he was like, I've been filming this on my phone because, like, my nephew's got CP and, you know, he walks like you, and I can't wait to show him. This is just so amazing. You know, it was a big deal for him, not just in terms of, I'd already got used to the idea of disabled people coming to gigs and my narrative being important to them, but disability isn't just about the disabled people. You know, non-disabled people are affected by it, families of young disabled people, as in this case. The representation, it became really central, and I was a little bit uncomfortable and a bit unsure about that at first, but I realized that it's not really about me, it's about what people see, as one either Emily or Amy, one of you said, you know, it's about seeing your own story reflected in somebody's art, and that's a really powerful thing to be able to contribute to. So yeah, it's massive. It's really massive.
Yeah, I guess, I guess I have a question. Was there anyone when you were growing up that you saw that made you think, oh, I want to do that, or I want to be, or I can be that?
Well, there was never I never saw any disabled musicians growing up until Mick Scarlett. Anyone? A few of you will know of Mick Scarlett. So I saw Mick Scarlett on TV when I was really young, and we're good friends nowadays, and he loves to be reminded of just how young I was when he was on TV. But I'd never seen I'd already decided I was going to be, you know, a famous rock star, but there was no sense of representation until one day I saw Mick on TV, and it was like, yeah, it was the thing that was so exciting about Mick, and something I've always tried to bear in mind, is he wasn't just a cute, it was not just someone in a wheelchair having a go. Like, he was really in your face. He's punk as hell. He was really edgy. And I thought, yeah, that, you know, I'd been, you know, in SEND schools and things, and I couldn't, even disabled children that I was still a child at this point, you know, disabled children that I'd met, I didn't feel that I fitted in. I felt I was pretty angry and rough around the edges, and, you know, I liked loud, scary music. And then there was this guy on the TV that was like, oh yeah, that's like me. That's like, yeah, it made so much sense, you know.
CARIEN, does this sound familiar to you with the people that you work with in your organization?
Completely. And again, it's absolutely important in all the work that we do, that, you know, say, for example, when we go into school, and Chris can echo this because that's a couple of projects we've worked with you on as a music leader, is that the young people we work with, or older people we work with, see, you know, music leaders, music facilitators, musicians who identify as disabled. So you don't forever sit in a classroom and be taught by non-disabled people. So that's got to change. And we are, in our own work, in a small way, constantly changing and addressing that. And that has a powerful impact. And a lot of young people have said to us, actually suddenly, seeing that actually, so this could maybe be for me. And the problem is that what we often find is that some expectations are, people sometimes seem to think that if, say, a young disabled person cannot achieve or make music in the same way as anybody else. So to see that, which, and so there is something around attitudes and expectations that we need to address. But actually for somebody to see that, either on stage or in the classroom or in a management role, that is saying, this is possible. I can do this. And I think there's another thing that we find, and again, that I'm really passionate about, is how do we create really relevant, accessible progression opportunities for disabled people who want to have a career in music, whatever that may be, on or off stage. And again, that doesn't, and what do you need to put in place in order to make that happen? And what can you do? And to kind of, for somebody to go and think, oh, hang on a minute, I could do this.
Yeah, it's that, if you can't see it, you can't be it. And I'm, just to your point earlier, Karine, around, the structural change that needs to happen in order for these, the sort of bigger changes to happen, because it sounds like everyone on this, in this panel, and I'm sure many of the people that are tuning in are used to doing those little things, but it's about those big structural changes and making significant shifts. Jeff, I'm wondering if there were artists that you saw that really inspired you to feel confident to go out to gigs. Do you ever see yourself reflected on stage?
Both yes and no. There's definitely artists who've really inspired me. I think a lot of it is also comes down to things like, obviously, like Karen just mentioned, visual representation is quite a key thing. And I found that, because I've been brought up around, people who've got learning difficulties mostly throughout my life, so I was brought up with the kind of things which I had being relatively normalized to a certain extent.
Yeah.
And I guess it's like sometimes there are invisible barriers which people may not always be aware of. And I think so. It's hard, because I can't really pinpoint it on one artist. I mean, I could obviously pinpoint like Daniel Johnston, for instance. There's someone who's been a big, massive influence on me. Or there's
why has he been such a big influence on you?
I think it's partly, I got introduced to him via the documentary that came out about 10 years ago called The Devil and Daniel Johnston. I think it's just that sometimes when he sings so kind of expressively about some of the things which were kind of going on for him. And I think it's like how music can be used as a direct form of communication. And I think that it's become, I guess, a lot more easier some ways to talk about some of the subjects because of that. That like some shows I may go to, like they'll mostly being grassroots venues. I don't necessarily go to shows always to feel good. To feel something. Like one of my favourite shows of this year was More Mother at the Exchange, and she's like an incredible industrial hip hop artist, but her whole thing is that she does ask very challenging questions of the audience about kind of like sexism, racism, yada yada, but and it's that willingness to kind of almost be opening to feel vulnerable.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Emily, I'd like to bring you in here to maybe talk a little bit about the importance of allyship. And so, we're here in this panel in our own diversity, you know, obviously some diversities are missing. But I'm wondering, you know, for you, how important it is to have allies, people who don't identify like you do, but support the work that you do.
Yeah, I think allies are amazingly important. There's not going to be real systemic change that we've been talking about until people from the different protected characteristics that you're talking about, until everyone gets on board as allies. I think, yeah, to have that real change, we need to have everyone on board.
How important is it, for example, to have male allies that, you know, challenge sexism, for example, in gigs? You know, as a woman who has gone to gigs my entire life, you know, if I had a pound for every time there have been some, you know, I'd experienced some form of sexism or sexual harassment, I'd be a very rich woman. You know, and only it's relatively recently that we've kind of said, oh, we actually need allies in this. We need our brothers to stand up. So I'm wondering if that is an important issue for you as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's not just allyship within like the crowd, as you were talking about, but it's also allyship within the organisations that put on the gigs as well. Like a lot of promoters and venues are owned and run by cis men. I think we need those allies to be putting things in place, to be getting training and to getting their staff to a place where they can support people if these things do happen. Yeah. For example, within Leeds, I know quite a few venues have now had the Good Night Out training. I think things like programs like that are invaluable in tackling problems like sexual harassment at gigs.
What do you have a view on this, Chris? On allyship and the importance of it for you, or perhaps not?
Yeah, I mean, it's obvious. It is. It's definitely important, because I think once it breaks out of the gravity of, and this is one of the problems that I've made some videos that were quite been praised as being quite on point about certain access issues. One of the things that I face at gigs is that I'm an ambulant wheelchair user, so I might get out of my wheelchair, and that will cause some degree of controversy for somebody, because some people can't cope with that. Clearly I'm faking it. Clearly the wheelchair is part of an elaborate ruse to cheat the system. So you need, I think that, and one of the problems I had was I was beginning to make these kind of videos and this commentary was that I was finding it hard to escape the gravity of people who, you know, preaching to the choir, people who already knew the narrative. They already knew that this was a problem. But what you need is people who don't know that it's a problem or are outside of the issue to get behind it and make a difference. And that's when you know, there have been examples through my career where that's definitely happened. Certainly organizations like IVW and Attitude is Everything have really been massive allies to me personally, but also seeing it's great when you see artists who've got behind things I've said publicly when it doesn't affect them. Actually, it's not, you know, once you think beyond the boundaries of what affects you, that's when, that's where real change will happen, because I can speak to my audience of lots of disabled people who go, yeah, man, right on, man. But it needs to escape the gravity of that, because I'm talking to people who know this stuff anyway, you know?
Yeah. Breaking out of those silos and stopping, you know, breaking beyond the preaching to the converted, like you said, is so crucial. It's crucial to that structural change as well that KRIS mentioned earlier. So I'm wondering if our lovely audience have some questions that they'd like to post up in the comment chat area, because we have about 20 minutes left, and I want to make sure that everybody has any questions, that they're able to get them answered. We've just had Tiergarten Records say, seconding the love for Attitude is Everything. They're a fantastic organization. Well, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth that because they've I feel really changed the landscape for grassroots live music venues, and actually for larger events as well, you know, with their sort of bronze, silver, gold badging, and there's sort of clear communication. So everything from a sort of baseline DIY, that DIY guide that we mentioned, up to working with, British summertime, in Hyde Park, and everything in between. So do we have any questions or comments? I'll give you a second to kind of put those up. In the meantime, while you're having a little think, sorry,
Can I chime in on the attitude point?
Yes, please, Chris.
Yeah, because I think one of the things that we were keen to get across, my first tour with IW was all in partnership with Attitude, and it wasn't. We were trying to raise the awareness of what it means to be a disabled artist, and I think a thing that they're really keen to stress, and I certainly want to get behind, is that information is really the key issue with access. It's not about going around and bashing venues and for not being accessible, because there are limits in terms of funding and the age of buildings, and there are. Making everything accessible is a complex issue, but what is frustrating to me is ending up in situations where I wasn't informed enough to make a decision about whether that was something I could do, and that's a big problem that I think people could the worst thing that people could say to me, the absolute red flag to a bull, is when somebody describes an event as being fully accessible, because there is no such thing as fully accessible. You cannot meet everybody's access barrier, and what they usually mean is they've bought a ramp, but like I tick a convenient box in terms of disability visibility, like I'm a dude in a wheelchair, so that's a kind of an easy-ish problem to solve, but it doesn't solve there's so many other problems to deal with here, and it's really about the information in terms of events and venues that matters, giving people informed choices rather than just saying, yeah, we're accessible. Rant over. There you go.
That's great, Chris. I've got a question here from Damien McAdams, who says, if there's one simple practical step that each venue could initiate right now, what would you recommend?
What I just said, yeah. Let's start with the information. That's important. Anyone else?
Yeah.
I'd say for me, it's the communication. If you're communicating what an event is, what the capacity. Also, if like I've got a friend of mine called Zach, and he quite often has to ring up the venues and ask them what their accessibility is, or especially for people with kind of autism, Asperger's, who sometimes get intimidated by crowds. Is there any way that he can go and stand somewhere safely, sort of thing, and still enjoy the shows, sort of thing?
That's a really good point. And it goes back to what we were saying about attitude is everything, and that training. So much of this is available. This information is available for free on their website as well. It's just the clarity. Putting it on your website makes it so much easier for people to access that information rather than having to get on the phone, make a phone call, maybe nobody's in, again, that's another barrier to communication. So I think your point, Jeff, is a really important one. I don't know if you have any thoughts on this, Karien. Do you think there's one thing that a practical step that a venue could initiate right now?
Think about programming relaxed events, for example. So and embedding that more in terms of the program for a venue, and and everything else has already been said. But the other thing is to just don't make any assumptions, and listen and learn and ask when you don't know. There are organisations and artists and musicians out there who can help. We've talked about Attitude. There is Drake Music. There are others. So it's not a case of having to kind of work out where you get.
There's lots of good practice out there and lots of help. Yeah. So, I'm wondering, do you have any insight into this, Emily, that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I guess I'd just mirror what has already been said with communication online, putting all the information out there to start with. So from a sexism point of view, if you do get training, like with Good Night Out, put that online, tell people what your processes are. If you run a venue, I can tell you sexual harassment is happening in your venue, whether you know it or not. But if you put these things in place, you can help your audience. If these things happen to them, you can help them get through them and make your venue a much safer place for them to be in. I think
Yes.
they're invaluable.
Similar to what we've been saying about the good practice that's out there from Drake Music and Attitude is Everything. Good Night Out is a fantastic organization. So I'd say for any grassroots live music venue that wants to make a really easy impact for how women experience gigs in their venues, Good Night Out is a really great place to start. Eleanor has a question here, and it's a really great one. It's, what steps do you think venues could take to make themselves safer for members of the LGBTQ plus community? Would anyone like to jump in here?
I'd say talk to community and see what it is that they need. Every community is different. I think an LGBTQIA plus community does have very specific needs compared to some of the other communities that we have been talking about. I think some of them do have crossover, as we've been talking about previously. Yeah, talk to community is key, I think.
Yeah. Jeff, did you want to come in here?
Yeah, I was going to say that it's all about like community kind of integration, really. So that means, like speaking to the people who belong to the LGBTQ community, it's a bit like kind of what Emily's just said, really. But it's also about like kind of seeing if there's ways that they could encourage, LGBTQ events into the venues, so that would like kind of like getting them to put on nights, getting them to put on, nights which appeal to, like, I guess, a cross spectrum of people as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And, encouraging, say, independent promoters to come in and run a night. If a particular community feels welcome, say, every third Wednesday of the month, they're more likely to feel welcome there the rest of the time because, they know they can be safe. I work very closely with LGBTQ plus venues. I mean, I've run a club night myself for 25 years and, a member of the community myself. And I can say from my own personal experience that one of the big barriers, I think, is around security. And if you're going to a space where there is security, and often security may not be trained or aware of particular sensitivities, so they may misgender people. Even bar staff can do that, misgendering people, or, taking the easy option when it comes to gender. So my partner, and I often get this, she's very masculine presenting, but people still call us ladies. And I can say that, like, it's quite uncomfortable for her, because it's just, it's this quote unquote easy way to just kind of make things more smooth or more comfortable for those that maybe aren't part of the community. But it can be really quite distressing if you're experiencing gender dysphoria, if you're anywhere on the trans spectrum. And I'd also say that, in some places, having rules and restrictions around what's acceptable dress and what's not. We've come up against those kinds of things. So, I think it's worth doing some training. Again, Good Night Out is really great on this because they are fully inclusive around LGBTQ plus communities. And for those that run venues or gig-goers in London, we have a lot of resources at the mayor's office to help support this. Being an LGBTQ plus friendly venue does not mean, oh, we just have a picture of RuPaul in the toilet. Like, it goes much, much deeper than that. And, as you've said nothing, there shouldn't be anything about us without us. That's another phrase I often use. There shouldn't be anything about us without us. And that's true for people in, in all sorts of diverse communities. So we've got just about 10 minutes left. So if you would like to put any last comments or questions up, now is the time to do so. Abby has a question here. What is your take on historical buildings denying they can make any adaptations for those with disabilities? They can't install a lift, but also deny the responsibility to add in a process towards supporting those with disabilities to be able to attend. Is this something you've come up against? I mean, I guess from a touring perspective for you, Chris, this must be quite familiar, I imagine.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, I'm not going to name and shame at this point, but there's a venue not a million miles away from me that on their website it states, because all the gigs are upstairs, and they say, like, we can't make it accessible because we're a listed building. And that's not how it works. Nobody said listed buildings can't be accessible. That's not what the law ever stated. So to play that card is really dodgy. I've spoke with venues who are as frustrated as I am because they don't have the support and the funding of local council. I'm not an expert on how these changes get funded. I know the Arts Council funding has been available, and I know of projects that have been supported in that way to make them more inclusive. I've performed in some old buildings that had some very strange solutions to access, but it can be done. So yeah, it's a very thin excuse to play the historical building card, and I don't think it's legal.
Yeah, CARIEN, I'm sure this is something you've experienced as well with the artists and performers that you work with.
Yeah, this happens on a fairly regular basis, and yeah, I think it is very much what Chris has just said, and also then about being really explicit and proactive about how you're going to change. And again, change can be in small steps. You can have what can I do in the short term? What real difference can I make in the next month, or in the next 6 months? What's going to take a lot more time? What's stopping us from doing this now? Is this around having the resources, the funding, the expertise, the investment that we need to make those changes? But first, also, is there a will and is there a true commitment to making those changes? Are you saying, I'm not going to stop until we have begun this journey and we're well on it, and we are continuing to make our venue the accessible, welcoming, inviting space that everybody can enjoy being in? So, but understanding that some of that can't happen overnight, because that you need to put certain things in place. But there are small things you can start with, which aren't even that small, but they are signaling that you're serious about change.
Yeah, I think that's so important. You've just really just said that so clearly and succinctly, CARIEN. It's really inspiring to hear you say that. I'm wondering we've just got a couple of minutes left, but we managed to get through most of the hour without mentioning COVID, which is quite a miracle. But I think that COVID does give us an opportunity to build back better, as some people would say, or to kind of keep the good stuff, and get rid of some of the stuff that maybe wasn't working so well pre-COVID. And I'm wondering, if we had a crystal ball and you were able to, to look into that crystal ball and say, this is what a grassroots live music venue is going to be like post-COVID. This is what I'd like to change. This is what I'd like to happen. Let's keep the good stuff and get rid of the bad stuff. What would that be? Emily, would you like to, I'm sorry, I know I'm just throwing it on you like that.
No, that's fine. So the good stuff, obviously, the community, the amazing arts that come into grassroots music venues. But then the bad stuff, I think I definitely want there to be better support for women and people of marginalised genders. So whether that is the sexual harassment things that we've been talking about, or whether that's putting more women and people of marginalised genders on stage or into the crew. I think I'd definitely like to see a lot more people being hired for positions that they're not necessarily seen in a lot of the time, like for techs and backstage.
Brilliant. Thank you. Chris?
What would I keep? Good stuff. Right, how are we going to fix it? Right, I mean, I don't know. I'm just thinking off the top of my head, like the stage access thing, for example, like something that I've started to think a lot more about is why have live events got to fit into this very, very old business model? And we can think about that from a lot of different access points of view, whether it's like the time of day an event that happens. You know, why do gigs need to be so late in the day? Why does a performer like me have to be on the stage, for example? Do you know what I mean? Could we not think around ways to put the performance in a space that, you know, is more inclusive? I'm trying to do I've done a little bit of performing online. I know that's going to be a part of our future, and I'm really interested in the fact that I'm engaging with disabled people for whom going to gigs and performing gigs wasn't an option anyway. So a lot of things have been opened up by this. There's a lot of disabled people, myself included, who are a bit frustrated by so many conversations of things that we've wanted to happen that have happened this year. I remember being told to drop out of university because I needed some remote distance learning, and it was just like, yeah, if you can't get here, just quit. And now everyone's distance learning because like we need to. But I live most of my life, unfortunately, through the filter that as a disabled person, my needs are I'm just not as important in society. I'm definitely lower down the ladder, and my needs, unfortunately, they're just not a priority. That's how it feels for me, certainly. And I feel that even the idea of disabled people being invited to the conversation about diversity is a relatively new thing. For a long time, I've been saying, you know, nobody's talking to us yet. We're not part of when a big organisation wants to tick their diversity box, they haven't even considered that disabled people exist in that conversation yet. It's thrown up a lot of questions, and I think it's quite interesting and a little bit frustrating sometimes. But
thank you, Chris. CARIEN, in this COVID world, what would you like to keep? What would you like to see put in the bin?
Yeah, there's something. Well, very much what Chris was just saying, that, you know, the speed with which our world suddenly sort of became a digital online world, and almost anything was possible. And many of the musicians and artists we're working with saying exactly the same thing. Welcome to our world. This is how, or welcome to our world in that suddenly we all had to, we weren't as mobile, we couldn't go out as much, we had to stay at home, we had to access things online. So I don't want to lose that. I do understand that not everything can be done online, but actually, what can an organisation like ours or a small venue do to continue to also program events that are accessible online, so that people cannot go to that venue, cannot travel, or simply don't feel comfortable in that space, can still access it in a way that can still be exciting. It's not the same, but it's not there to replace it.
Yeah, it's a sort of mixed model going forward. Jeff, what about you? What would you like to put in the bin, and what do you want to keep and make better?
Oh God, well, obviously I think it's going to take a long time, because I'm still getting used to actually being around people. Because of and actually that's one thing which is going to take a lot of people quite a while to get out of, is, post lockdown, is actually learning what's, the acceptabilities and the boundaries, and how do we, learn to feel safe around people again, especially considering quite often I'd be, my safest spot would be tucked down the front by the stage somewhere, because of then I would have the direct communication from the music and from the artist, and then also that I could cut out whatever background noise to a certain extent.
Right.
But then also quite often I would like kind of look around the room and see if I'm having a shared experience. And it's about like those sorts of things, kind of probably having to get used to those.
Yeah. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Jeff. That's really great insight. And that draws our panel to a close. That just flew by, and still so much to talk about. I know Sybil wants to join us and just say a few words. Hi, Sib.
Hi, everybody. So good to see everybody. We're almost to the office for this, so we can be together. But I just wanted to say the most enormous thank you to you all for taking part on this panel. And Amy, you're right. Yes, we didn't have any Black representation, and a great deal more that we could do there. But the insight from you all was absolutely fantastic. And I think it's really interesting what you were saying, Chris, as well, about how COVID has driven everybody to be able to do things remotely. And it's a shame that it's taken that. And I hope that we do start to see a real change in our community, both on stage and off stage, for people across all parts of society and life to have equal opportunities across the board, regardless of their background, whatever minority the group they're from. So just the most enormous thank you to you all for taking part today. It's been a real...
Thanks, everybody. Lovely to see you. Like to meet you.
Lovely to meet you guys.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye-bye.